6 years ago, when the then Minister of Power, Babatunde Raji Fashola, issued the eligible customer policy in the power sector, it was hailed as a potential panacea to the electricity supply problems facing Nigeria. That policy and the regulations backing it signaled a move by the government towards what is often referred to as willing buyer, willing seller trading arrangements in the power market, a structure that promised consumers a guaranteed minimum supply of electricity and improved service in exchange for cost-reflective tariffs. One of the ensuing developments was the premium power agreement between a small middle-class community called Magodo in Lagos and the distribution company serving the area, Ikeja Electric, allowing the community to receive nearly 24/7 electricity. The move was applauded and hailed as a turning point in the way electricity is delivered to consumers across Nigeria. The program and its outcomes illustrate the need for huge investments and capital injection into infrastructure and smart grids that will enable supplies to be willed reliably to consumers that can pay. But what has stopped this model from being replicated at scale across the country, and what opportunities exist for new types of models in electricity supply in Nigeria? Well, I'm glad to be joined in the studio here in Lagos by Mr. Chiedu Ugbo. He's the managing director of Niger Delta Power Holding Company, the company that holds all the Nigeria Integrated Power Projects, NIPP assets. Also joining us from our London studios is Sola Arifayan, a lawyer and managing executive at Electric Utilities Limited, who also happen to be transaction advisors to Niger Delta Power Company. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, gentlemen. And I'll start with you first, Mr. Chiedu. Has the aim for which your company, the NDPHC, was originally conceived been achieved?
Thank you for having me here this morning. Good morning, viewers. Yeah, I can say that we have substantially met the objectives of National Integrated Power Project. That's depending on the way you look at it. If you look at NIPP as an intervention project company, yes, we have done that. But however, I've always argued, what is the use of infrastructure if you do not have the electricity for which it was meant to provide? So NIPP was set up to build 10 power plants. We've completed 8 of those, and we have installed capacity of over 4,000 today on ground. But you may ask the question, are we delivering energy from these 4,000 megawatts? I mean, there are systemic challenges around that. But yes, the people's money have been spent and the generation capacity is available. We've also done tons and tons of transmission projects, and we continue to do transmission projects all across the country. At 150, substations, you have 150 MVA substations, we have 60 MVA substations. That's, high voltage, the one you call, what do you call it again? The high voltage transmission lines. We call them high tension lines in Lagos here. Yeah, we've invested quite a lot in that. In fact, we pride ourselves at NDPHC as having provided about 50% of transmission capacity in Nigeria today.
That is very.
And then we have a lot of distribution projects all across the country. In fact, under my watch, we've done well over 100 distribution projects all across the country.
I mean, on paper, the numbers are certainly very huge, and we'll come back to understand why we just haven't seen an improvement despite all that investment. So I'm going to go over to you, Sola, in our London studios. You know, NDPHC manages 10 power plants through the NIPP. And one of the groundbreaking things we saw years ago was the premium power agreement with Magodo Community and Ikeja Electric. Is this something that perhaps NDPHC can replicate under its current program to improve supplies to residential and commercial end users? What are your thoughts?
Good morning, Walaka, and thank you for having me. So that's a very good question, right? And one of the things, as you mentioned in your introduction, that the eligible customer policy and regulations in 2017 was meant to achieve was an opportunity for power generation companies, right, to sell power directly to end users, something somewhat similar to what Ikeja Electric and the community in Magodo had done. And So to answer your question directly, I would say yes, but on that, of the 300 megawatts or so electricity that NDPC has contracts ongoing for the sale of, somewhere around 50 megawatts, it's in those kind of trades. But a decision that NDPC made a very long time, very early on in implementing this process, was that there was more. You heard MD speak to the fact that NDPC has 4,000 megawatts of generation capacity. And if we were trying to sell 4,000 megawatts, we felt that rather than looking for the odd individual customer here and there that met the requirements specified or stipulated in the eligible customer regulations, right, that the better way to go and the best approach was to get into a relationship directly with the discos that essentially linked electricity right from the gas molecules in the ground through to the customer that sells, so that ultimately the arrangements were directly at the discos collaborating with NDPC with a view to serving the customers better.
Yeah, I mean, Sola, you make it all sound very simple, right? But I want to understand what the hurdles are really, because, you know, all the megawatts, 4,000 megawatts, and, you know, if you look at the end user end, we still have these significant shortfalls in the supply chain. So maybe, Mr. Chiedu, I'll come back to you to really understand what the issues really have been. By now, we should have thousands of bilateral agreements of this nature, shouldn't we?
Yeah, we should. It requires some level of preparation. If you go back to what they call the mischief, which the minister's declaration, followed by the regulation by the commission, was meant to cure, you see that in the industry we had huge liquidity challenge, we had huge dispatch challenge, dispatch in terms of demand from the generation companies, again, because of transmission and distribution bottlenecks. So as a way to solving that, as a means of solving that, the minister made the declaration. And if that declaration was made, then, of course, you have to go out, look for these customers. You have a lot of preparation is required. We've done that. We've been speaking to we've been working, not just speaking, we've been working with a number of distribution companies. I can tell you today we currently serving a code distribution, which is Lagos, this area where you are now. We have been discussing and negotiating with Port Harcourt Disco. We've been negotiating with, we're discussing with Kano Disco, and of course, Benin and all of them, etc. A lot of preparation is required because it is definitely and some level of length transaction. It's not just bring power and then plug it in. We have to recover the cost of our investment. We also have to be sure that we are paid for the power we supply to the distribution company. So all these things have to be in place.
Yeah. And you know, I was going to delve deeper into the relationship between distribution and generation companies, which is something that probably facilitated the kind of models you saw in Magodo. So this issue around bottlenecks, you still talk about liquidity, and almost 20 years later, since the original power sector reforms took place, we're still talking about liquidity challenges. Have we not learned anything from the experience of past years?
Yes, we have. Of course, the privatization was done in 2013, and takeover was around November. There were emerging issues. Of course, the privatization was done especially for distribution companies along the lines of reducing the losses in the distribution end of the business. And these losses are technical, commercial, and collection. Collection is where the liquidity is at. But even there are technical losses, which means power is going out without the money coming back. There are commercial losses. Theft is a big one. And of course, collection. Collection, so you have tariff issues. There are tariff issues that were linked to cost reflective at the time. And there were tariff issues that were linked to the inability of the distribution companies. That's what they call market shortfall. And then, of course, you have tariff shortfall from the regulator. So all this, again, the regulator needed time, one, to understand this, and because there are regulatory issues. And the regulator has now resolved to a large extent the tariff shortfall by trying to ensure that the tariff meets costs. And then, but a lot of investment is required for the distribution companies to cover the market shortfall. And that is ongoing. And the metering, there's national metering program that the government is doing, intervening. And there are some interventions again from the World Bank. So a lot is happening in that sector. Again, this takes time to realize. So with time, the liquidity issues, of course, will be largely resolved. But we still have some level of investment, again, required in transmission to make sure that available generation capacity in the country is evacuated for the benefit of end users, to distribution companies, and of course to the end users. And that's why we at NNPC, we are trying to work end to end from generation to until the power gets to the end users. And that's where we are collaborating with the distribution companies to ensure that that happens. And of course, the regulator too is pushing that seriously. Recently, the three major distribution companies, viable, have been literally pushed out of the market in terms of going through the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company and say, go, you guys are strong enough, go and contract your power bilaterally with the generation companies. That's ECO, Ikeja, and Abuja. And we're discussing with them.
Yeah, we'll talk more a bit about some of the policies that are sort of easing the bottlenecks in the system. But we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, the discussion on power supply in Nigeria continues. Stay with us. Welcome back to Business Week in Arise News. Before the break, I was talking to Sola, Arifayan, and Mr. Chiedu, Ugbo on the power sector in Nigeria. And Sola, I'm going to come back to you now to ask your thoughts on how the current decentralization policy for electricity markets will influence the, I guess, penetration of these decentralized and bilateral arrangements. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Rolake. I think when we're speaking to decentralization, right, we can take that in any of several directions, right? MD had alluded to the regulator, NERC, essentially releasing 3 discos to go contract for the power that they'll supply to their customers. That's one form of decentralization, which I think is great because it moves the market towards what my personal opinion, I think, is the best way for the market to work. Let individual entities acting commercially make their take their business decisions rather than a somewhat centralized, for lack of a better way to put it, government-driven process. So that's one way. I think it's great. I think it moves us towards more rational, economic-driven commercial decisions in the sector. There's also again, you could say there's also the recent, fairly well publicized development of the president essentially signing into law legislation that constitutional amendments that essentially free state governments to go legislate and do all the activities right across the value chain in their states. I think the jury is out on that one. I think it creates the risk of what I'll call a proliferation of laws and regulations that brings a bit more confusion into the sector than currently exists and than we need. And the way I think to properly understand the potential impact of that is, you had a conversation earlier with MD about liquidity in the sector, right? And that's something that always comes up. If we take a step back, right, and we realize that however priced power of the Nigerian power grid is still cheaper than any competing source. I mean, in the 1800s, right, Thomas Edison had said that, look, his goal was to make electricity so cheap that only the rich will burn candles, right? It's funny, but when you think about it, per unit of illumination, whether it's a candle, the kerosene lantern, the petrol generator, or the diesel generator, the least expensive power source is still off our grid. And so my view is that anything that essentially introduces more complication into the rules that drive out that happens might not be the best move to make. And really, what's important in my view, I am going to say this carefully, but I think it's important, is that government sets the bare minimum rules that allows business to take business decisions.
Yeah, indeed. And I have to ask you this question because we talked about this earlier and you were convinced that it is possible to have almost 100% availability from the grid. Convince us, how is that going to work? And what do you think needs to be done to enable that happen?
Okay, thank you, Rolake. Again, let's back up a little bit, right, and understand how the Nigerian power sector, in terms of physical infrastructure, is laid, right. We've got across the Delta, through to the Southwest region, and then up north to Kogi, a bunch of gas power plants. I think about 23, 24 of them. And then into Niger State, we have 3 hydro generating plants, right? All these plants generate their power and put it on the transmission grid. So when ND talks about its 4,000 megawatts of capacity, the other plants in the sector as well, we get to about 13,000 megawatts on the grid, of which, say, 8,000 is available, as they say, can produce power today if required. All those power plants generate their power and put it on the transmission grid. TCN takes that power and moves it across the country at ultra-high voltage levels of 330 kV and 132 kV, and then drops them for the 11, or you might say 12 discos at transmission substations across the country. I don't have the exact number, but I think there are at least 250 of them, maybe 300. I'll be surprised that there's any part of this country that is not less than 20 or 30 kilometers from a transmission substation. Now, if you go to any of those substations, right, you'll find that, by and large, power is available about 98% of the time. We do suffer from grid collapses, and from time to time, TCN does take outage on lines to maintain them, or there might even be a fault on an individual line. But by and large, if you go back 2-3 years, you find that each of those transmission substations are available 98% of the time. And then you ask, okay, so why don't I have power in my house? Why can't I power my factory reliably from the grid? What we haven't done a fantastic job of, in my view, is create the environment, right, that enables what I'll call the last mile investment that translates the 98% you have at the transmission substation to the factories, to the homes, to the commercial centers where the power is required. And so effectively a regime that we're beginning to see that enables that investment to be made in a way that also allows for cost recovery will help us to begin to translate the 98% at TCN to
the end users.
Say 95, 98, where the power is required. Of course, there's still work to be done, because the truth is that everywhere else in the world, the grid is stable, it's available near 100% of the time. So we still got to do a bit of work to get TCN to a place where we stop suffering those grid collapses and we do not have unplanned outages on the grid. But by and large, and we're seeing results. You mentioned Magodo. We're also seeing in some of the areas we're collaborating with discos. And the discos, the companies that we're selling power to directly as well, are getting power off the Nigerian grid at near 98, 99% of the time.
Okay.
So we're confident that it's something
thanks for breaking it down that way. I think it actually kind of really brings it home, which leads to my next question. I'll come back to Mr. Chiedu here in the studio. He talked about the last mile investment that's required, and I wondered whether you could even paint a picture of just how much of an investment shortfall there is right now in the power sector.
It is, that's not very easy to estimate.
Good question.
I know that you require, for that last mile, you need to have a very good handshake between transmission and then distribution. We have a number of issues in the interface, transmission distribution interface. Transmission a modest transmission substation, 2 by 60 MVA, which can weigh comfortably 100 megawatts to homes, will cost you somewhere around 5 billion, and you need a couple of that.
That's Naira.
In Naira. So I know the transmission company, they have their performance improvement plan now, and they will require somewhere around $1 billion to get us to 25,000 megawatts from where they are now.
Where is that money going to come from?
Well, it could come from different sources, donors, DFIs, and of course, government. But I've also pushed, I've been advocating for what we call independent transmission projects, which is a flip side to what you have in generation IPPs. So let investors open it up, let investors come and take some part of transmission projects in terms of lines, build and manage it over time, and then, of course, transfer at the end when they've made their recoveries. I mean, it is gaining ground all over the world, and we should do that. We should allow private investment in that area. And of course, I mean, when we say independent transmission project, we mean just the transmission infrastructure, because transmission houses three functions. There's market operation, and of course, there's system operation that ensures coordination and reliability of the grid. I'm not talking of those. I'm talking about providing infrastructure and then ensuring that it is maintained, and then power flows to distribution companies. At the distribution end, the major issue is collection efficiency, and a lot of work is being done in that end. And we too at NNPC, we are working with them. Last mile investment. Let's work. Yes, we have electricity all the time at substations. We want to work with you to take the 33 kV lines to the substation, build substations, and of course, ensure that from the substations, distribution transformers are there and individual homes are served. It is not rocket science. We've done that. I've connected tons of villages in Nigeria today, and we've seen it's possible, it's doable. Some at distribution end, distribution infrastructure is cost a lot, I mean, less than transmission infrastructure. I can't estimate what is required now, but I know that there are, again, investment and interventions in that area. We have the Presidential Power Initiative by the federal government, the Siemens project, dealing with the distribution network as well as a transmission intervention. And all of that would come to some fruition in a very short time. It's not, you can't really estimate, but like Sola said, and like we've been advocating, open it up, franchising, like you talked about the Magodo example, open it up to private investment. Yes, let them come. Nigerians can fund that if the investment requirement for their area is low, because if you break them into multiples, people can come and invest and run them. What is required is proper coordination for safety and for reliability.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you for breaking down and sharing those insights in such a thoughtful and detailed manner. Also, thank you to Sola Arifayan from our London studios. We've been speaking to Mr. Chiedu Ugbo of the Niger Delta Power Holding Company and Sola Arifayan of Electric Utilities Nigeria on the power sector. Well, that's all we have time for in Business Week. I'll be here at the same time next week to bring you some more top stories on global business. But send me a tweet to continue the conversation online. In the meantime, do enjoy the rest of the weekend. I'm Rolake Akinkunmi Filani. Bye for now.